Good afternoon, everyone. According to my computer, it is noon sharp, so I will go ahead and get us started, and you should be able to see the first slide of our presentation for today on the AI and Assessment Survey that the ATAC committee gave in 2025 and 2026. So our agenda for today, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the ATAC, including the fact that it is now a different name than the TBA committee. We'll give you a quick overview of the survey. We are going to have an audience poll at the very beginning, so please go ahead and get your phones out because there will be a QR code to scan for this. And then you will see, as we go throughout, you're going to see some selected survey analysis with all of us chiming in as facilitators for this. So today, the facilitators are myself, I'm Kimberly Swigert, NBME and current ATAC chair, Leslie Thomas of Criterion, who is the current ATAC vice chair, Pat Ward of ITS, who is a past ATAC chair, and John Weiner of ACT, who is both past chair and founder of the ATAC. And for a couple of housekeeping points as well, we have a lot to talk about with you today. We will have a Q&A that is open. The chat, we can put things in. You won't be able to put things in, but you'll be able to see what's in it. But you'll be able to post questions for us in the Q&A. If we don't get to the questions, we are going to save out the questions and try to answer them and put them in as part of the slide deck for when a PDF of the slide deck is circulated after the fact. So hopefully we can get to some of them. If not, we would like to answer them. I also just want to, before I forget, also acknowledge Zach Irwin of Criterion, who was really the person who came up with the idea for this presentation and did some of the work for the graphs that you're going to see. Also, for accessibility purposes, if you need it, there is a way for you to turn on captions for the webinar. If you click More, which should be next to your Q&A button, and click Turn on Captions, that should provide them for you. The session is also being recorded, and that will be available after the fact as well. Okay, so what is the ATAC? So this began as the TBA committee in 2022, primarily to promote the joint ITC ATP guidelines for technology-based assessment and to encourage best practices in assessment using technology. The TBA phrase is a little bit vague, so there was some desire to come up with a name that was less vague, more meaningful, and would take into account our subcommittee that was formed in 2024 that has produced multiple documents on AI use guidance and best practices. Because of this, we decided to change both the name of the original TBA committee and the AI subcommittee this year. So the committee is now ATAC, which is AI and Technology and Assessment, and the original AI subcommittee is now RAA, Responsible AI and Assessment. And this fits nicely with the direction that the subcommittee has gone in, and that we have produced multiple documentation that you can see at the link here on responsible ways to use AI, ways that you can use it applying specifically to test development, and a really nice detailed document that we are going to be updating very shortly on human oversight and the use of AI. So if you've not already seen these documents or aren't familiar with this committee or subcommittee, please go look on the ATP website. We do have a ton of information. And one thing to note too is that there are other committees within ATP that have AI subcommittees. So another reason for us to change this name was to make sure that we didn't have overlap with those other committees, but we could also raise the visibility of the AI work we've done within both the committee and the subcommittee. So the survey, we started this in 2025. It was an anonymous survey across the testing industry, just to get a snapshot of where organizations were, what they were doing with AI, and what the perspectives were. We got 220 respondents for the 2025 survey. We repeated it in 2026. It had most of the same questions, and then some additional open-ended questions about specific uses and details on AI. And as of today, that survey has 2,206 responses. The two links that are provided here show you the raw data. So you can export it from there. You can look at the analyses that are already prepared in terms of just sort of the numbers. But we wanted to do it this way. That's one reason that it's completely anonymous, so that you can actually go in and look at the results yourself. You don't have to rely on what we present to you today. We're going to give you some analyses that we think are interesting about these data, but you'll be able to use either one of these links to go in and click around and see the results from 2025 and 2026 for yourself. So now we are on to the audience poll. So if you've not done so already, have your phones ready, because the poll, and this hopefully will work, will take you to a poll in Microsoft Forms where you will see 2 questions. Each one will have 4 options. And what you are answering is, for each of those, which one do you think showed the biggest positive change from 2025 to 2026? The first question is going to be about test development uses. The second question is going to be about organizational support tactics. Now, if you've already scanned in this, great. If not, this QR code is going to be repeated on the next slide, so you'll be able to scan it there. And hopefully this works, because this should be a dynamic dashboard. Yes, it is working. So what you should see on your screen is responses as they come in for these poll questions. And I'm going to give us a couple of minutes to allow you to look at the questions and fill those in on this one slide. I can look to see where we are both with the first question and with the second question. And so the responses are coming in very fast now. That's good to see. And we're asking you these primarily so that you can think about what your expectation for them is going into this. So just looking amongst those, which were not necessarily all the options that were provided in the survey itself, this gives you a minute to think about what you think has actually increased the most between 2025 and 2026. Might not be the option which is actually being observed the most, but the one that had the biggest shift. And then as we go through this presentation, we're actually going to show you the survey results that relate to these specific questions. So you'll be able to compare your expectations to the values that we saw in 2025 and 2026 and the changes that happened. So it looks like for this one, out of 72 responses so far, 59% same question item rationale generation, probably the least same cheating detection. So that's only at 10%. So that's interesting to see. For the second question, what do you think organizations are doing? What tactics are they using to best support? AI-powered office tools. Not surprising, you do see a lot of that out there. That might very well have gone up the most. Fewer internal efforts, fewer explicit policies in terms of the change. So if you want to continue to use the poll, I'm actually going to move on at this point. But just think about, in terms of what we put up here, even if you're not answering the poll, you can see the options here, where you think that takes us and what you think you're going to see, and compare it to what you're actually going to see next. Okay, so with that, I'm going to transition over to actual poll responses, starting with answering that question that we just polled you about. How did AI use change over time? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pat.
All right, thanks, Kimberly. All right, so let me set this up for you guys so you know what we're looking at. First of all, this is going to be focused mostly on test development tasks. Your blue bars are your 2025 yes answers, and your orange bars are your 2026 yes answers. So if you actually look at it, the largest change was in the classification coding. And one of the reasons why the one that you chose was not was because it was already quite large in 2025. So that would be the sort of difference there. I'm gonna just start with just a couple of I think relatively obvious things that sort of show up very quickly in this poll. First of all, is that we're seeing widespread usage across all aspects of test development. That message is going to come through a couple of different times today, but you'll see that. And then the other thing I think it's kind of interesting is the other two things I would think is interesting is one is the things are starting to catch up a little bit to question item content creation, which was really the starting point for a lot of people. And then the last piece is on the left-hand side is sort of the percentage, and you'll see that only the question rationale stuff is over 50%. I find that a little bit surprising. So I think the idea is that we have a lot of room to grow here. So with that, let me throw it over to John.
Thank you, Pat. And Kimberly, thank you for your introduction to the session. Yeah, and looking at this slide, there's some things that are encouraging and others that are not surprising. As Pat pointed out, we're definitely seeing growth throughout the testing life cycle in the use of AI. Now, of course, the details about how AI is being used and to what extent we're talking about, full automation. I think my experience has been we're talking about as an augmentation to human processes at this point. And I think that's something in the next survey next year for the next benchmarking, we'll probably drill into that a little bit more. One of the notable emerging areas that I wanted to highlight, which was included in 26, but not in the 25 survey, is the third bar, which has only 26 data, which is predicting pre-test data or live test data. This is an emerging practice that is really important because as the use of AI in generating test content grows, and it's continuing to grow, it's only, that's great, that's encouraging, but it's only part of the problem that we face in building examinations. And we need them to be calibrated and made equivalent when we're making alternate versions of a test or using automated test assembly or some of the more advanced applications. So this what I'd call nascent budding practice of predicting pretest statistics or actual use of the statistics can help avoid or reduce the need for field testing and really help unlock the power of automated content. So I think that's important. And the last thing I'll say is I continue to be surprised that form generation and assembly are not more widely used in terms of whether it's AI or just algorithmic automated form assembly. It's been a practice that's been available for a long time, but still not, we have maybe 30% of the organizations or respondents indicating they're using that. And I think, I'll just close by saying that, this really illustrates that although we have these capabilities, and they're powerful, adoption doesn't always follow. And there are a lot of reasons for that. So while it's encouraging to see the use of AI growing, in many cases, we have even older technologies that are not widely adopted. So with that, I'll pass it back for the next slide, unless
Sure.
others have comments.
Well, I just have one, which is that it's not surprising necessarily that classification or coding has the biggest shift. I am a little surprised that it's not closer to question item rationale generation, simply because it seemed like the natural progression was to use AI perhaps behind the scenes a little bit to help do better item bank management, to perhaps see if that you could automatically classify your items based on the text that's in it, because that's, not something that's necessarily going to be observed by anyone outside of the test development unit. So I think it's interesting if this indicates that, in fact, there seems to be more movement towards actually using it to generate items themselves than to use it for classification and coding. It feels to me like those two things should be a little bit more closely connected, if not more, on the classification and coding side. Leslie, is there anything?
They kind of come together though, Kimberly, because I know
They
with the
do.
question item rationale, you're kind of coding it as part
You're
of
kind
it.
of
And then
coding
the
it,
question is,
yeah.
do you need to recode things? We
Mm,
found that a lot of programs, they were reluctant to take a mature program and recode. That was not a goal of theirs, right? So it does
okay.
happen, but it was not as
Yeah,
big of a, so that might be why
that
initially
could be
right
why.
now.
Well,
Yeah, I
and
agree, Pat.
the coding and classification functionality has gotten a lot better capabilities, and it makes a
Hmm.
lot of sense that it's almost double because that's also one of the
Yeah,
areas that takes a lot of time for subject matter experts and so forth. It's a very manual process, so it's good to see that
yeah.
increase.
Okay, awesome. So moving on, which is about the AI systems and support. And John, take it away.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick off the discussion and talk a little bit about what impresses me about these trends here. One of them I want to pick on is psychometric analysis. It's not the largest. I'll save software development for Pat, but one of the areas that's really well suited for the use of AI, especially something like Claude to code, is I'm seeing the use of Claude, for example, to generate the code that is used to conduct psychometric analyses, and maybe using Claude to program in R and build all these routines with a dashboard to enable routine psychometric work like item analysis or equating or things like that, and make them available to for use with, and sort of bypassing the use of traditional manual stat packs and processes that are sort of the backbone of operational testing programs for them, especially in high stakes. So I think this is an emerging area that we'll see a lot more of. It doesn't necessarily need AI to operate. It's an interesting application in that it's using AI to create the code and to create the dashboards, and then it runs as code. And AI is not necessarily involved, although it could be. It just depends on the model. But I saw some interesting presentations on this approach at the NCME conference back in April, where this approach is being taken, and I think it's very promising, and it's just really one illustration of the use of AI to build code to replicate processes that we have today that maybe streamline them and do create efficiencies. So I do want to highlight that, and maybe it's a good time to ask the audience a question about you could answer this in the Q&A box, get a little practice with that. What kind of psychometric analyses, if any, are you using for AI to support? Is anyone doing that? And if you are, maybe add it as a note in the Q&A. We'd be interested to see that. Okay, so I picked one item to highlight. There are obviously many that can be commented on, and I'll reserve further comment until I'll pass it to Pat to maybe pick up the conversation, and maybe I'll add to it if there's time. Pat.
So I guess just to start, again, broad support across just about everything for what programs and companies are doing. So that'll be the first thing. I want to call out maybe two things. First of all, software development. It looks high. One of the reasons these bars may not go quite as high as one of the options that we didn't sort of embed in here is, does not apply. So I can tell you pretty much every software engineer is now using AI just about, or will be. It is just part of the job now. If they're not, it's just a matter of time. AI is just quite amazing at that kind of area. So that's not surprising. The other one that I just want to point out is cheating detection. And you'll notice cheating detection went down between the 2 years. Now, we don't know exactly why, but I do want to make a comment that I think this is the wrong thing to take away would be that it's not being used. Actually, it's the opposite, I think. So from my perspective, pretty much every vendor who does remote proctoring is taking advantage of AI for cheating detection or is in the process of doing it. It's just a matter of time there. You're also going to see it at the center level now. You're going to start seeing that in 2026 and certainly in 2027. So it is a major part of what's going on. I mean, AI is basically part of the problem for cheating and content theft, but it is also a major part of the solution. So it's a big part of all that. So with that said, Leslie, Kimberly, anybody want to jump in?
Well, I'll
Great.
just add, since there's a minute left, nobody jumped in. I think the aggregate report analysis, is another area of interest, not only because it's increased between 25 and 26, but I think, reporting in general is one of the sweet spots, I think, for the use of AI in assessment, to really add power, in terms of analytics. And, this is at the aggregate level, so it's not necessarily personalized, but it could be. But there's a tremendous amount of power around sort of BI, adding insights and visibility to programs through greater AI-powered reporting. So I think this is an up-and-coming area that is just going to. I think I see that spiking even further next year.
Yeah, I agree.
Great, thank you. So those were on the two questions that were related to the audience poll. So hopefully you had a little bit of time to look at that and reflect and compare your answer with the actual data and perhaps be surprised if you did agree or perhaps if you didn't agree. Moving on, however, the next slide that we're going to show, now we're getting into some other areas of the survey. So this one says which types of AI support are most prevalent. So here what this is asking is, what is your organization doing to support AI, and how did that change over the years? So again, the 2025 bars are blue, the 2026 bars are orange. And I will say what got my attention right off the mark when I looked at this was I am surprised that the explicit policies, which is the first category, is not now 100%. That seems a little foolhardy to me. Not surprised to see it the highest one in 2025, which it was at nearly 60%. But when you look across the orange bars, the conclusion is that there are organizations that have enterprise level access to generative AI, that have AI powered office tools, internal efforts to support literacy, although that one's a little bit more in line. Where you have more people reporting yes that they're doing these things, that yes, we also have an explicit policy on this. And that seems a little concerning because the policy really feels like it needs to come first, or at least in alignment with everything else. I would also encourage anyone in the audience, if your organization does have a policy, consider why or that it might already be somewhat obsolete because things are moving so quickly. I think that not only is it a good idea to have a policy ready to go, but to have some sort of trigger as you bring in more AI capabilities to your organization, more people are using it for different things, that there is some type of reminder to go back to the AI policy to verify that it's still useful, that it's still accurate, that it still covers all the uses that are being made at your organization. Again, that's to stop people and organizations from wading into trouble that they may not see coming when they're using AI for specific things. In terms of the biggest shift, really it's in most of the uses. So it's not about the policy or for job-specific AI applications, but we saw pretty decent sized shifts for the other uses of AI, as well as internal support teams for AI training and internal efforts to support literacy. That's not really surprising either, that we are seeing, big shifts across most of these domains. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John.
Thank you, Kimberly. And I completely agree with you about your comments on policy. Yeah, those are very insightful. When I looked at this chart, a couple things jumped out to me that I'd like to highlight. One of them is in terms of the enterprise level adoption. I did a little research outside of our research, and I found some good stats reported by AI Business Weekly. And they're reporting results of other surveys by McKinsey and others, talking about adoption rates at the enterprise level of 90%. So I think our results might be underrepresented or just showing the trend spiking. It is spiking. Needless to say that the saturation is just around the corner. So I think the idea of the use of AI in not necessarily in assessment, but in office AI powered office tools and enterprise level access, that has just grown quite a bit and is on track to keep going. The one thing that I thought was a little interesting here was that given those high usage rates, the level of AI training seems to be lagging way behind. It's not up that high, which sort of indicates what we would suspect is happening is people are, figuring this out on their own, kind of without all the right guardrails, related to policy. Hopefully there's some policy training, not only that, but the tool training itself. So it should all be part of the governance process that helps people use these tools effectively and within the guardrails, using the right tools and so forth. So a lot of opportunity around the world of training. Yeah. So those were some insights I had.
Okay, great. I am going to move us forward at this point to looking at some of our open-ended responses because we had a few questions primarily about what are your positive feelings about AI, and then also what are your concerns about AI in both surveys. And we pulled out a few of the open-ended responses, but we also have summaries of what we saw across all the responses. And I'll ask Pat to get us started on our observations of the positive feelings about using AI.
Yeah, I think the summary does a nice job of sort of setting this one up. In 2025, we were talking about huge potential. In 2026, we're talking about the fact that it's useful. The respondents are actually seeing, in 2026, actual usage and value. I can say from my perspective, my company kind of fits that as well. There was a lot of investment and costs before 2026. Where we really started turning the corner was last year and coming into this year, in the second half of last year. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is there's just been an investment, and that investment just starts to pay back, so over time, training, tools, things like that. And then we see that the tools are just getting, amazing. John mentioned Claude earlier, that things like that have come out and just, really jump again, where things are getting better and better. So that said, Leslie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so one of the other questions we asked on the survey was about key lessons learned. And what's interesting is when you look at some of those lessons learned behind these positive results, there's kind of three key areas. One, AI adoption strategy is just as dependent on your people and trust as it is on the technology. Also, there was a lot of discussion about when you go from experimentation to actually rolling it across the organization, that it's definitely not plug and play. So it requires a lot more setup, a lot more prompt refinement, more workflow redesign, and ongoing maintenance than is often expected. So one of the key lessons there is that when you do go from experimentation to operationalizing it at scale, expect that it's going to take more time and effort than you likely expect and plan accordingly and budget accordingly. Also, that AI doesn't automatically increase productivity. We already kind of know this, but one of the interesting things that was discussed is that it's highly dependent on user skills. So users must not only have some fluency in AI, but they also need to have some domain expertise in order to effectively evaluate the outputs. And I thought that this was really interesting because one of the phrases that's gaining a lot of popularity out there is rather than saying human in the loop as part of the oversight process, to call experts in the loop to acknowledge the fact that domain expertise is really important when you're evaluating these outputs. And then last is that AI improves parts of the workflow, but not necessarily the entire workflow. So it works best for specific types of tasks, such the ones we're seeing like classification coding, summarizing, reporting, analytics, and also drafting initial content. So when you're picking tasks to use AI, it's best to focus on specific, well-structured tasks where the output's easy to review and that humans can fix the outputs and quickly correct errors. So any other thoughts?
Sure.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm
it's okay.
sorry.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, I'll just jump in real quick. So I had two observations about this, and they're sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. So on one hand, the conversation does seem to be shifting, from 25 to 26. It's sort of shifted from, should we use, speculating about, well, this could have impact, it could be transformative. It's sort of like speculating. 26 results sort of move from, the kind of the should we use it and speculating what will happen to more, it's useful. It's, putting it into practice. So that
Mhm.
the conversation has shifted for sure. What seems the same to me and what hasn't shifted is that the focus is pretty much on efficiency, cost savings, time savings. We're not really to the point yet about talking about true innovation.
Mhm.
Or maybe I'm sure it's happening. We're innovating, depending on how you want to define innovation, but we're mostly focused on doing the same things better, faster, and cheaper, right? So that's where it is right now. And that's why I'm eager to look at next year's survey to see if we start hearing a little bit more about innovative uses or innovative types of assessment that, I'm eager to hear more about that, so I just those were a couple of thoughts I'd share on this.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, if you as an organization have invested in AI and you have new capabilities and things that you're eager for your organization to use, but you're not yet seeing the return on investment that you expected to see, either with efficiency gains or innovation, I would urge you to go back to that list of what organizations are doing to actually support AI use and realize that it is not necessarily just about the technology. And if you feel that your organization is limited in how well they're using it, that's probably not because of the technology. It could have something to do with all of the other support systems. People are concerned about whether or not they can safely use it with your organization's data. Maybe there's no policy, maybe there hasn't been a training session. All of that could help if you look at this and say, we got this great new technology, but people aren't using it yet, or they aren't using it that often. It might not just be about the capabilities, but also the structure you're putting in place to help your organization use it.
Agreed.
Okay. Pat, why don't you kick us off with concerns about AI assessment?
Okay. I'll just call out two things I thought were sort of missing here. Well, they have test security, but I had a meeting actually this week, with agentic AI and moving it to the desktop and sort of doing different things in your organization. Security is actually becoming a massive issue. This is one of the reasons why your best practices may need to get reevaluated, because it wasn't really an issue 2 years ago, and it is an issue. So I think that's kind of missing from here, partially because it's kind of new. And the other thing I think is kind of missing from here, as far as just the big concern, is sort of the big impact, the negative impacts on society and environment related to AI. And that's just part of it. And it's something I'm concerned about, and I think we all should be. So, Leslie?
Yeah, I thought what was interesting with this is in 2025, there was a lot of concern around job displacement, and now there's a much more concern about AI's impact on our critical thinking skills and other core skills in terms of writing, analytics, and so forth. And this is concerning because as we just mentioned, that human oversight piece is so important that we're calling it experts in the loop. So it's degrading some of the very skills that we need to use AI effectively. One of the other things it mentions is that, you still have hallucinations or errors, but they've become much more difficult to detect as the models have evolved, which means we need even more expertise in order to catch them. And so, it's a lot of the risks remain the same, but it's more the impact on us as far as being able to use it responsibly. Kim, John?
Yeah, my observation here is that overall, it seems that the concerns are very similar this year as to last year. I mean, in terms of validity concerns, ethical concerns, concerns with bias, maintaining appropriate human or expert oversight, those those are constant. I think what's changing is the level of urgency around these, because as AI gets adopted, as adoption increases, the level of urgency around these becomes a little more real, right? So each one of them, I would just say, is magnified this year, because of that. And I believe they will continue to become more urgent to identify address. So that's my quick takeaway on these.
Yeah, and I would just add, when I look at all of this, I see a risk scorecard or a risk profile for your organization when it comes to AI, because I see a lot of things that organizations are capturing as potential risks of using AI. For example, like morale or skill set in terms of being replaced by AI, and you actually see some comments here that call that out specifically. So this might be a good starting point if your organization is not already thinking about AI from a risk perspective, to start documenting some of these, and for your organization, do a deep dive and say, do we think this is actually something that's likely to happen with our use of AI? What do we think the impact of that happening would be? What could we do to control for that? Which again, that's where that support system comes in. And then how well a job do we think we're doing? And that, like a policy, is something that you would need to update on an ongoing basis. But hopefully this kind of feedback and these kind of survey responses could help your organization think in that way if they're not already.
I like the
Leslie,
scorecard idea. Oh, I was going to say, just to piggyback on the scorecard, I wanted to give
Mhm.
a plug to the NIST framework for risk
Yes,
management for AI,
yes.
which is sort of a measure, mitigate, manage approach to, basically a
Mhm.
scorecard, if you will, and to manage the risks of AI, because they're not going to be the same for every organization.
I
Agreed.
wanted to do a quick comment on, Leslie is expert in the loop. We talked about this in the AI subcommittee yesterday, and I think it's going to be a bigger topic, is this whole machine bias concept of
Mhm.
the fact that it's a real concern that people tend to accept, an answer given to them by a machine without necessarily giving it the validity, and the issues of, are we still going to have our critical thinking and do what we normally do when we're faced with that? And there's been studies that show it's a real problem. So just building off of that, something we're going to be talking about a lot in the next year.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So this was a call out that Pat specifically wanted to make for this audience that he thought looked interesting. So I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, so this will be a quick one. I was interested in for-profit versus nonprofit, and I think it kind of answers the question John brought up earlier about, is our industry, underrepresenting in our survey? I don't think it is, actually. I think we're in a conservative industry. I think we see it in lots of ways. Um, and a lot of it's driven by the validity issue. So what we're seeing here is your blue is your for-profit companies, your vendors, your oranges is your nonprofits, your programs primarily. And you'll see, I think the two takeaways is, yes, your vendors are pushing things faster. And I think the other interesting things is that the nonprofits are not very far behind. And we're seeing a lot of investment everywhere. And I think this is about right. This is what we should be seeing, and it's a nice way to go.
Yeah, Pat, I'll just say that, that AI Business Weekly journal that I mentioned earlier pretty much corroborates what you're saying, and, across industries, is that tech companies have a super high adoption rate for AI. They're near saturation now, meaning closing in on 100%. And they contrast that, for example, with government organizations, which are the adoption rate is much lower and kind of more or less categorized as cautious adopters of AI technology. And because they have to be, because of, under additional regulatory funding type, constraints around them. And so, and also, keep in mind that many of the public sector, or I should say nonprofits, they contract with the for-profits to do the work. There's a lot of, outsourcing of the work from the organizations that aren't necessarily adopting it to the ones who are, which raises the point of, if you're not using AI, you may still be using it if you're working with someone else who is, right? So
Sure.
your vendors.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting trend, and I think your insights were great on that, Pat, to really pull that out.
Great, thank you. And at this point, Leslie is going to take over to talk about what some of the future trends are for AI.
Yeah, so our, up until now, we've been talking about, what's changed from 2020 to 2026. And now we're going to talk about kind of the future trends. So what we did for this slide and the next one was we looked at who answered yes in 2026, the percent of people, which is represented by the blue. And then we combine that with the percent of people respondents that said they were actually planning to use it in particular use cases. So to show the overall intention in the future. And as you can see, this is for the test development activities. Now, what's interesting to note is that, the adoption part of it is relatively early. And even when you're combining the yes answers with the plan to answers, most of the use cases are still below 50%. So that tells us that there's still a lot of runway that's left. I thought one of the more interesting use cases that we asked about was the use of predicting pretest and live statistics. As John had mentioned earlier, there's a lot of uses for this information. I think one of the more interesting uses is to help reduce the bottleneck that we often see. So AI is great at generating content, but we often see the work being shifted downstream and having a bottleneck in that process. And so one of the ways this could be used is to, set criteria as far as minimally acceptable statistics before items are actually sent to subject matter experts to review. So there's a lot of ways that we can use this information to increase the efficiency of the process, which we know is important. John?
Well, I couldn't agree more with that, Leslie, in terms of, adding to the value of, question creation, generating content, which, looks like it's on a very upward trajectory, surpassing 70%, and if you add that to classification and coding, which is sort of there are two pieces joined at the hip, that's well on its way, to becoming, predominant use. But you're right, there is the bottleneck. There is, that loses its value if you have a pile of items that you still have to wait through the pre-testing process to get calibrated and then put into use. So that's going to be a key. That's going to be a key item. And, and it's encouraging to see that the orange top of of that bar in the third column, with that much growth. So I really like seeing that. I'm also encouraged to see that for automated form generation and assembly is going to get up close to 50%, as well it should. That's been a neglected area. But I think it's pretty clear. I mean, the usage, there's no reversal in terms of the pattern, and they're all growing, which is great. So this gives us a little bit of insight, I think, of what to expect in the very near term in terms of AI adoption among our community.
Pat, did you have anything to add? I think Pat, are you frozen or are you there? Okay.
No, I'm here. Nothing for me.
Okay.
He shook his
I'm
head.
good.
Okay. All right.
All good.
Okay.
All right, so I'll start this one off. Yeah, so as we've been talking about, the orange on this one again is the plan to, blue is where we are when we did the survey. A little bit of a rebound here for cheating detection, so we see that growing. I also thought it was kind of interesting, the other category. I think it just kind of goes to show the breadth of this entire sort of, when we talk about disruptive, there's nothing been like this, right? It goes across everything we do, everything we're going to do, that sort of thing. Programming remains the highest, but you'll see the others are starting to catch up. I think that's right. And we're all kind of moving towards that, very top level. So no real surprises. So, John?
Yeah, I agree with you, Pat. No real surprises. And I think when I look at this chart and the chart on the prior slide, it just yeah, I think we're getting to the tipping point, as if you want to call it that, in terms of past the 50% mark in for most uses, and then with the support that's needed for them. So I do think that the cheating detection is notable because it does span multiple applications, right? It's analytic as well as test administration, and so it's going to be a fast-moving area. I wonder about how it's going to relate to when we do get to the point where we have mass quantities of item content, and we are able to calibrate it quickly and get more content out there. I wonder how cheating detection is going to evolve, and hopefully some of the risks will be mitigated. But overall, I think the trends are pretty clear for the near term. It's on the upswing. Nothing's overtaking another use. They're all just going up.
Yeah. I will say, I thought it was interesting that automated scoring is still not higher than it is even when you add these two together, just because that was, psychometric innovation goal well before the current AI trend. Obviously, having automated essay scoring and things like that available makes performance assessments much more scalable. And so I was expecting to see that much bigger in terms of actually, yeah, we're doing that or we're planning to. But there could be multiple reasons for that. If you're not doing a performance assessment, you don't really need it because you're scoring MCQs, in which case you don't necessarily need it for that. Or it could be that there's a lot of exploration going on with AI and automated scoring right now that is not necessarily as promising or as accurate as people would like to see at this point to be able to say, yes, we're actually using that as part of our exam. But I do think, John, to your point earlier about innovations, wanting to see innovations, I think it's with things like automated scoring that we're going to see, oh, we can really unleash what we want to do in terms of a performance assessment. We're not limited to MCQs. We're not limited to essays. We're not limited to text even, because we've got these systems that will enable us to very quickly score something that is innovative.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Kimberly. I think we could look at automated scoring as a bellwether for adoption of, open response questions, performance questions, other more innovative types of assessments that have become much more feasible and will continue. So I think this probably is a leading indicator of, the need for growth in that area.
I think it's also good to see the not related to that, but to more operations where a lot of this is being used. The knowledge and support systems is high, not only for internal, but a lot of organizations have found for candidate support that's really helpful, and especially for organizations that are smaller that don't have a lot of staff. This can really help them decrease the amount of time that is required to support candidates. So I think it's nice to see that's so high and that so many organizations are using it in that way.
Okay. With that, we are on to our final thoughts. There's a lot of data we didn't even touch in this because the surveys are pretty lengthy. So if you haven't looked at the results live yourself, I urge you to please go do so because you might find a lot of interesting little things in there that we didn't have time to cover today. But we're each just going to take about a minute now to give our final thoughts on what we saw about the survey, even if it was something we didn't discuss today. And Pat, you can kick us off with that.
Okay, I'm going to actually come back to that innovation type of thing because I sort of disagree a little bit. I think there is actually some innovation going on. In remote proctoring, it's kind of being reinvented because of AI. I think that's a big one. And, I know we and others in the industry are working on new innovative item types that are AI-based, that the entire item comes out of that, performance-based. Whether it's an interview or watching actions and that sort of thing, going down that kind of path. We asked the question on this particular survey, and We didn't get a lot of responses in this area. I think that's going to change. So that would be one of the predictions that I would do. Last year I was talking about how we were overestimating what AI could do today and underestimating what it'd be doing tomorrow. That's really shifting. AI is coming through right now. And I'm gotta admit, I'm continuing to be amazed, even though I'm very much immersed in this, and I'm continuing to be a little bit scared by all of it. I think my advice would be to take advantage of this, to be careful, and just to come back to that whole environmental type of thing. Just let's remember that AI is not really free, and we're paying for this. So I'm not sure who's going next. Somebody jump in.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in, Pat. And those are good points. And I think you're right. Obviously, there is an innovation happening. It seems like it's not at scale like on some of the other applications. It's maybe a way to say it would be the innovation that's possible isn't really being realized quite yet. But there's certainly great things happening. The item I wanted to focus on is a little bit different. I think it was touched on a little bit today, and that has to do with demonstrating the value of AI in assessment. I think as we're getting our bearing and learning how to use AI to reap to create all kinds of capabilities, whether it's efficiency or innovation. I think also have to get good at how do we capture and demonstrate the value of the use of the tools. You can call that ROI if you want to, or maybe it's that and other things. But so we do still have to be concerned with the strategy behind it. Are we fulfilling a strategy in the use of AI? Are we solving important problems? Are we solving the right problems that have measurable value? I'm using general terms because each of those would have to be defined, and maybe that's another session. But we gave some good examples earlier. We can generate lots of content, but is that adding value if organizations don't have the capacity to leverage it? Or do they even need it if they're not doing high volume testing? So who is it right for is the right thing. So I think what's needed is, along with the other expertise we're building around AI, is to build what are the right metrics and what are the right business cases where we can show that the value of AI in different contexts for different strategic reasons. So I think that's a real opportunity for us to do that. So that's my little item I want to talk about for the future of AI. For us to realize the future, I think this is one piece of that is making sure we're putting AI to strategic use and that we're capturing the value, the costs, because it's not just, you can't just say, oh, it cost me 87 cents to do this Claude Code thing. No, you have to look at the bigger picture around what is your governance, what is your training, what are all the things around it that it costs, but also capture what is a true benefit. It's not just that you created an item, you did a lot of other things. So there's the opportunity, I think.
And I would just add, I'm thinking about something right now that's technically not in the survey, but it's related, which is among not just vendors, but also nonprofit organizations. I'm starting to see some more discourse around, well, what's the risk to us if we don't use AI right now? Are we going to be left behind? Are we going to be perceived as behind the times technologically, or perhaps not trustworthy technologically because we're not up with it? Leslie mentioned examinee feedback. I was thinking if examinees are used to seeing chatbots and automated responses for registration and FAQs and all this stuff for every other organization, and they come to interact with your organization and they don't have that type of AI supported back and forth like a chatbot, are they going to come away thinking, well, they're not with it. They're not using technology yet in a way that you would expect them to be using. And I'm not saying decisions should be based on that, but organizations should be prepared to hear from governance or stakeholders, whomever, why aren't you using AI? Why haven't we done this yet? Are we at risk of being left behind? Are there going to be things that we need to do that we can't do because we're not doing this? And that you should have an answer for that. It could be related to anything we've talked about today. It could be related to the investment costs up front, or the concerns from the human experts, or anything else that we might have mentioned today. But I'm seeing more and more, not just how should we use it, but why aren't you using it, being tossed out there. And it's something that organizations should be prepared to have an answer for.
Yeah,
And Leslie?
I think that's a very important point. It's also interesting that a number of comments talked about leaders pushing to use AI, but not having a really good adoption strategy and not having policies in place and so forth. And, one of the survey results showed that there was more rollout of the tools and enterprise use of AI, but the training really lagged behind. And we see that all the time, where people have these AI tools, but they don't know how optimally to use them. So either they don't get used or they don't get used well. And so I think, we a lot of times when we look at these types of things, we are so concerned about the technology that we forget that we need to really invest in the people and also the processes surrounding them. So, making sure we've got the training, making sure we've got the policies in place so that people know how to use it securely and ethically and all those types of things. And so I think really the shift needs to be, and what we're seeing in some of the responses is, 2025 was, AI is going to be magic and change the industry and transform everything. And then 2026 and going forward, it's really going to be like, okay, how do we use AI well, get the most out of it, ensure we're using it for the right use cases, and that we're getting that ROI that we are hoping to get for the process.
Great. Our remaining slides were wrap-up information, and in my presenter view right now, I can't see the Q&A, but is there a question that popped up during it that we think could be answered in the next 1 to 2 minutes that any of you would like to tackle?
I've been sort of typing a few as we go here.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
Good. Yeah. Unfortunately, with the type of view I have set up, it's not the easiest thing for me to go back and forth.
yeah, but we will try to.
Yeah, go ahead, Pat. I was going to say.
I was just saying we're going to try to answer as many as we can,
Yeah.
either today or to pass them on. So a lot of good comments and thoughts in here.
Yep. And so to finish off here, as Kimberly mentioned earlier, that there are a number of really great resources that the ATAC and the RAA subcommittee have been working on. This shows you just a few of those publications. We've got generative use of AI in test development. We've got one that's very popular, Human Oversight in AI, Considerations for Responsible Use, and also the one on the overarching one on responsible and ethical use for AI policies. So there's also an AI glossary. There's a number of resources there. There's the QR code so that you can access these resources, which we'd highly recommend that you do. And then next slide. And then as far as upcoming ATAC webinars, we've got one scheduled for August of 2024. And this is going to be resilience and testing. So it's very practical and standards-based about how do you plan for and respond to test delivery failures. And that's going to be with Mark Molnar and Drew Wiley. And then in November, December timeframe, we are currently working on a document that looks at or asks a number of key people in the industry to provide their opinions on what the future of AI and assessment looks like. And so we're going to have a webinar that's going to discuss some of those thoughts and opinions from different people on that future and what that holds.
Great. And with that, yep. Both Leslie and I can speak to this since we're the current ATAC. I just want to thank everyone so much for attending today. We had a really high volume of registration and I think a really high volume of attendees. So that's awesome to see that people were willing to use, at least in the Eastern time zone, their lunch hour to attend this. And our emails are here. Feel free to email any of us if you want to follow up with questions. And, we'd love to hear more from you. Like I said, we'll go through the question and answer list. If there's things that we weren't able to answer that we think really should be some additional information, we'll put that in the slide deck. It will then be converted to PDF format and sent out so everyone can see it. Leslie, is there anything else you wanted to add before we finish up?
No, there isn't. Thank you for everybody for attending. We're very excited about the number of registrations and the interest.
Yeah.
One quick comment. We are going to be putting this out again next year. Love to have everybody respond. Our responses are a little light. And if you have ideas for questions you'd like to see, send them over. So.
Yeah, we usually try to time it so that we did this in 2025, not quite in 2026, where we do want to time it so that it comes out far enough in advance of the Innovations Conference that we can then speak to it at the Innovations Conference. We were able to do that in 2025, but didn't have a lot yet on it for 2026. So that's something that we'd like to time a little bit better, perhaps get it out in December, January this year, since the Innovations Conference will be at the end of February in San Diego. So look forward, if you're interested, look out for that, and hopefully come to our session in San Diego where we talk about it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
We appreciate it.